Hello, fellow humans. My name is Vlad Bunea, and this is Economy for Life. Today, we will talk about how to think causally about capitalism. There are many interpretations and stories about what capitalism is. The most common story is that capitalism is an economic system that consists of free markets, or at least attempts to make markets as free as possible, which means free from the intervention of the state, but only when corporations want it. Number two, the private ownership of the means of production, which is about who owns the capital required to produce goods and services. And three, a clear separation into two big groups of people: those who own the capital, also called capitalists, and those who work for a wage and are employed by capitalists. This is the most popular story. There are, however, other stories which say that capitalism is much more than just the three elements. And there are stories which say that capitalism is much simpler than this. On the more complex side, some stories see capitalism as an economic superorganism where global society acts like a single biological entity, like an anthill that is programmed to harvest energy and maximize its metabolism. Our financial system requires interest and growth to remain stable. This financial DNA forces the superorganism to keep consuming more energy just to prevent the debt-based economy from collapsing. On the simple side, interpretations inspired by Karl Marx see the capitalist economies as being driven only by the separation in the two groups of people: those who own the capital and those who work for a salary. I covered this approach in this video. A different way to look at capitalism is to look at the direct causes for the behavior of economic agents. By economic agents, I understand individuals, companies, public and private institutions that act for an economic purpose. I think there's a way to explain capitalism through a causal analysis. For this analysis, I will use two instruments from a long list of causal theories: the Markov condition and counterfactuals. The Markov condition basically states that we need to know only about the variable's direct causes in order to predict it. Let's see an example. This image tells us that there's a relationship between advertisements and buying behavior. The relationship goes in one direction. Ads influence behavior and not the other way around. Let's add another variable. If we want to predict if a purchase happens or not, we need to know if the person saw the ad or not. Weather is disconnected from the buying, so it cannot be used to influence buying or predict it. What happens if we add a cause to advertisements? If marketing strategy affects buying behavior only through ads, then the probability of buying depends only on ads, which are its direct cause. Once we have the ads, it does not matter how they came to be. Even if we found many causes for ads, this does not change the information we need to predict the economic behavior of buying, since the influence of all other variables all go through ads. I argue that in order to understand and define capitalism, we do not need complex causes, the flow of energy, the availability of natural resources, or the indices of stock markets. What we need are just a set of principles and how they are written down as rules, or scripts, as I call them, for the purpose of determining the behavior of economic agents. Sure, you can argue that writing these rules is also caused by the cultural environment, by the political system, by the personal motivation of the authors of the rules, and so on. I think all these causal explanations are irrelevant. It does not matter how the rules were written and by whom. Just like in the example with the ads, what really matters was whether the ad was seen or not. It is the same with the written rules of capitalism. What actually matters for defining an economic behavior as being capitalist is the exposure of economic agents to these written scripts. In this sense, the Markov condition acts like a filter or a gate or a metaphorical dam for the ocean of possible causes. This Markov dam is what causes directly the economic behavior. The Markov dam is the source of causal forces. For this reason, we can call the Markov dam as the fundamental causal structure of capitalism. The Markov dam is made of three principles that I have been talking about before. These principles are proportionality, links property to power, hierarchies, links power to capital, and dispossession, links capital to property. These principles are embodied by various written scripts, such as one share, one vote, which is written in corporate law, employment contracts based on which managers rule over their employees, terms and conditions based on which big tech takes personal data from us to use it as capital for making profit, mining and drilling permits, fiduciary agreements, corporate memos and emails that contain orders for workers, and so on. A good example, among many, to test the Markov condition is the COVID pandemic. Was the economic behavior during the pandemic caused directly by the pandemic, or were there other more direct causes? If we use the Markov causal dam, we can formulate this statement. Business owners laid off people because they were determined directly by the written scripts of capitalism that represent the three principles: proportionality, hierarchies, dispossession. All decisions of production during COVID came from these three principles and how they are written down. Strictly speaking, from a causal perspective, what makes an economic behavior capitalist is how economic agents are caused to behave by the written rules of the three principles. All other supposed causes are not necessary, which makes them irrelevant for understanding capitalist behavior. If the economy had different rules, it is very likely the behavior would have been different. For example, if we had democratic management of companies with no scripted hierarchies, the collective of workers could have decided to share company profits and company savings between themselves, instead of allowing top executives to make millions while the workers at the bottom were fired or had to live paycheck to paycheck. Or, for example, if the rules that linked property with power were different, we could have community-based approaches to business risks in such a way that when a pandemic hits, the community offers financial and social support for struggling small businesses. At the same time, we would not have bailouts of big corporations just because they have so much power that is in proportion to their property. Another example, if we did not have the rules and scripts of dispossession, then big tech platforms would be public utilities and our personal data would remain our own and not transformed into profit-making capital with or without consent. Regardless of what happens in the large ocean of causation, in the upstream of our causal dam, I argue what really matters, particularly for how people behave in the context of a capitalist economy, are the written rules or scripts of the principles of proportionality, hierarchies, and dispossession. With the Markov condition, we can prove how this is the case. Back to our COVID example. If the rules of the game were completely different, the behavior of economic agents would also have been completely different, with much less terrible social consequences. Therefore, COVID was not the fundamental cause for economic behavior at that time. the written rules were. Let us now turn to a second tool of causal analysis, namely counterfactuals. The basis of the counterfactual analysis is that for C to cause E, two things should be true. If C had not occurred, E would not have occurred. And if C had occurred, E would have occurred. Example, if I had worn sunblock, I would have avoided a sunburn. And if I had not worn sunblock, I would not have avoided sunburn. And some examples of economic behavior. The mass layoff of employees at the Washington Post was caused by Jeff Bezos, who had the hierarchical power to order it. If Bezos did not have that power, the layoff would not have happened. Elon Musk donated $250 million to the political campaign of Trump because he had the power to do so in proportion to his property. If power had been disconnected from property, or if we had a very low cap on wealth, Musk would not have been able to do that. OpenAI invests billions into data centers because decision power is concentrated with Sam Altman and a very small number of people. If power was not concentrated, then those data centers would not have happened. Counterfactuals help us identify root causes for economic behavior by testing various competing causal explanations. Once we try a very large number of causal explanations, we see that what remains standing in the end are the written rules of the game. Economic behavior is not caused directly by how much minerals we have available to make data centers and microchips, or by how much oil we have, or even by how much money we have. Counterfactuals have a weakness too. According to legend, Rasputin was poisoned, shot in the back, and thrown in a river to guarantee his demise. This is a problem for counterfactuals because any of these causes could have expired Rasputin. However, economic behavior under capitalism is not like Rasputin. All competing causal forces stop at the Markov dam. On the other hand, the strength of counterfactuals is that they can help us as a pre-filter of causal explanations when they can be identified clearly and when they can be made distinct from each other, making sure they do not have overlapping elements. Having these two instruments in our toolkit, Markov condition and counterfactuals, plus the three causal scripted principles, let us test some interpretations of capitalism to see if they offer a causal explanation for the behavior of economic agents. Interpretation 1, class theory. I talked in a recent video about how we can understand capitalism better than Karl Marx. If the claim is that economic behavior in capitalism is determined by the separation of people into two groups, capitalists and workers, then my question is, what causes that separation into these two groups of people? If we apply causal analysis, we find that the written rules of proportionality, hierarchies, and disposition are the cause for this separation. If we change these scripts of the three principles, we effectively terminate the separation of people into capitalists versus workers. Interpretation 2, ecological theory, such as the superorganism metaphor. This is a very sophisticated claim that wants to explain capitalism through some versions of overdeterminism, which basically is about having multiple overlapping and competing causes for economic behavior. I agree that there are many factors that can influence the behavior of humans, starting from milliseconds ago based on the chemical reactions in the brain, going back to seconds ago, to days ago, even millennia ago, depending on how traditions were passed down generations. All these are explained in detail and proved by Robert Sapolsky in his book Determined. However, for defining strictly a capitalist behavior, and therefore capitalism as a system, we only need three principles: proportionality, hierarchies, and dispossession that present themselves in various written rules. Interpretation 3, markets theory. This interpretation claims that economic behavior is caused by market forces. For example, prices are determined by interaction of supply and demand. When sellers agree with buyers on a price, that's when a transaction happens. This interpretation also says that markets, in general, reflect the desires of consumers, and prices are exactly where they are supposed to be. Prices would be changed if sellers believed they could not find buyers for whatever they were selling. In reality, prices are determined by those who have the power to determine them. The executives at Apple decide the price of the iPhone, not the workers at Apple and not the buyers of iPhones. Of course, buyers are manipulated a lot into wanting to buy, but the fundamental causes for the behavior of Apple executives are the three principles, and not what the consumers think about prices and products. The fundamental causes for how Amazon works, how they became a monopoly, how they set their prices, are also the same three principles. Modern markets are a creation by capitalists and for capitalists. Interpretation 4, private property theory. This interpretation says that the private ownership of the means of production is fundamentally important for the economic behavior under capitalism. People are motivated to grow and defend their private property. For example, maximizing profits and beating your competition are all about growing and defending private property. This is a true story. However, the root causes for this behavior are the written rules we have seen. Economic agents want to increase their private property because the design of the system determines them to do just that. Under a different design, where, for example, we had maximum limits on personal wealth, economic agents would stop pursuing the same goals and would switch to something else. For example, they would switch to caring more about others or to working collectively for a common purpose. This does not mean the abolition of private property. On the contrary, private property can be kept just fine. This would be about changing the rules of the game, or the scripts as I call them. Interpretation 5, power theories. Some advanced interpretations of economic behavior claim that economic agents are motivated by seeking power. Capital as power is one such interpretation. Power itself can be defined in many ways, such as having an ability to make others do things that they would not do by themselves, or just having an ability to influence others even if we do not use that ability. The capital as power interpretation may appear to offer a causal explanation for economic behavior. It says that the root cause for economic behavior is the quest for power. As an interpretation, I think the theory works just fine. But as a causal explanation, I think that it does not work because seeking power is determined by something else, which is more fundamental, namely the three principles we have seen and how they are written as scripts. Again, to clarify, we are only talking within the context of capitalism. If we had other scripts that expressed other principles, then economic agents may not seek power for the sake of power, but they may seek knowledge, as in Star Trek, or they may seek social harmony. Let's see a definition of capitalism from a causal perspective. We can define capitalism as the economic system where, number one, the realm of property is linked with the realm of power by the doctrine of proportionality. The realm of power is linked with the realm of capital by the doctrine of hierarchies. And number three, the realm of capital is linked to the realm of property by the doctrine of dispossession, while the growth incentive catalyzes all economic interactions. If we look at this definition, we may think it looks reductive in some ways and also more complex in other ways. I think if we use proper causal theory, we can focus on the causes that actually matter in order to understand capitalism and leave out explanations that are not actually causal explanations. There are many interpretations of capitalism out there that present themselves as causal explanations. Many interpretations suggest causality, but very few are explicit about it. Therefore, using careful causal scripted analysis, we can be much more focused on solutions because if we understand the real causes of economic behavior under capitalism, we can change them and replace them with something better. In my series, Undoing Capitalism, I looked at each of the three principles to offer solutions for what can replace them. I think this is the most practical and effective way of upgrading our economic system. Thank you for supporting my research on Ko-fi and Patreon. Please like and subscribe to please the algorithm. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Help us replace capitalism with an economy for life. Increase the peace.